Maria Torres, a scarred Marine veteran, works quietly at a North Carolina diner, enduring whispers and stares. When a businessman mocks her scars, she responds with dignity, hinting at her past. The diner's regulars notice, but none know her heroism. A week earlier, a young Marine left a note thanking her for saving his captain. As tensions linger, a mysterious line of Marines gathers outside the diner at dawn, each holding a cloth-wrapped token. Who are they seeking? What secrets do Maria's scars hold? The truth promises to unravel a tale of courage and gratitude. Join QH Incredible Stories to honor unsung heroes like Maria. Subscribe now to uncover tales of courage and resilience. Your support helps us share stories that inspire and unite. Hit that subscribe button, share with friends, and comment justice to celebrate true character. Let's keep these stories alive. Maria Torres woke each morning before the sun, the sharp beep of her alarm cutting through the stillness of her modest apartment near the old Marine Corps base in North Carolina. By 5:30 a.m., she stood in the fluorescent glow of the roadside diner, tying her worn apron with fingers that moved with the ease of routine. Her dark hair, pulled into a tight ponytail, framed a face marked by life's cruelties. Scars that snaked from her right temple, down her neck, and beneath her collar, reappearing along her right arm. They were a map of survival, a story she kept locked within her quiet brown eyes that saw the world but guarded her own truths. To the diner's early regulars, truckers bleary from endless highways, night shift workers unwinding with greasy plates, elderly couples stretching $2 coffee refills into hours of quiet companionship, Maria was a constant. Her coffee was always hot, her orders rarely fumbled, her presence efficient yet nearly invisible. But her scars were impossible to ignore, though most tried. They'd steal a glance, then fix their eyes on their eggs or newspapers, as if looking too long might demand answers they weren't ready for. Whispers followed her, soft but cutting, when they thought she couldn't hear. Car crash maybe? House fire, poor soul. Drug addict probably. Those types get into wild trouble. Maria let the theories drift past her, never correcting them. She poured coffee, delivered plates, and pocketed tips with a dignity that felt like a shield, protecting the parts of herself she wasn't ready to share. That Tuesday morning began with the usual rhythm, the diner alive with the clink of dishes and the low hum of conversation. Maria moved between tables, her notepad tucked into her apron, her heart carrying a familiar weight, a blend of resolve and quiet resignation. She'd grown accustomed to the stares, the way some customers' eyes lingered on her scars with pity or judgment. She told herself it didn't matter. They didn't know her, didn't know the choices she'd made or the cost she'd paid. But their assumptions pressed against her, a bruise she'd learned to live with, tender but bearable. As the morning rush ebbed, 3 men in crisp business attire strode through the diner's glass door, their polished shoes clicking against the worn linoleum. Their white shirts, loosened ties, and gleaming watches marked them as outsiders, corporate types likely en route to a meeting in the city. They settled into the corner booth, their voices loud and careless, tossing around talk of quarterly projections and golf handicaps like men used to commanding attention. Maria approached, menus in hand, her expression calm but her pulse quickening. She felt their eyes before they spoke, the familiar prickle of being seen, not as Maria but as a curiosity, a scarred thing to be judged. The largest man, broad and ruddy-faced, looked up as she set the menus down. His gaze locked onto her scars and his expression twisted into a sneer. "You really think you should be serving customers with a face like that?" His voice sliced through the diner, loud enough to turn heads. "Wouldn't dishwashing in the back be a better fit?" The words landed like a blow, sharp and deliberate, meant to wound. The diner fell silent, the air heavy with discomfort. An elderly man at the counter set his spoon down, his jaw tight. The cook froze, spatula mid-flip, his eyes flicking to Maria. She didn't flinch, though her heart raced, a quiet anger flaring beneath her calm. Her hands, steady as ever, poured coffee into their mugs, the steam rising in the silence. "I've served people like you before," she said, her voice soft but clear, each word carrying a weight that made the man's smirk falter. "In much harsher conditions." The words were simple but loaded, a quiet defiance that hinted at battles fought far beyond this diner's walls. The man's eyebrows shot up, his confidence wavering before he recovered. glancing at his companions with a forced chuckle. "Don't tell me you were military," he scoffed, his tone dripping with mockery. "With that face, you wouldn't make it past the parking lot at recruitment." His laughter, joined by his friends, rang out, harsh and grating against the linoleum. No one else joined in. A truck driver stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. He tossed cash beside his half-eaten breakfast and walked out, his steps a silent protest. Maria's hands trembled as she moved to the next table, refilling coffee for a regular who wouldn't meet her eyes. Her thoughts churned, a storm of anger and hurt she kept tightly leashed. She wanted to tell them, wanted to hurl the truth at their smug faces, to make them choke on their laughter. But she didn't. Her scars weren't just marks. They were proof of survival, of choices made in places these men could never fathom. She carried them with a pride she didn't need to shout, but their words still burned, a reminder of how the world saw her first as damaged, not defiant. The next morning, the diner felt different. The usual chatter was gone, replaced by a heavy stillness as customers glanced toward the windows. Outside, a line of Marines stood in crisp uniforms, their faces solemn, each holding a small object wrapped in cloth. The sight sent a ripple of unease through the diner, forks pausing mid-bite, eyes darting between neighbors. Maria, wiping down the counter, froze as she saw them. Her heart pounded, a mix of pride and dread flooding her chest. She knew why they were here, though she'd never imagined this moment would come here, in this diner, in front of people who'd only known her as the scarred waitress. The Marines stepped inside, their boots heavy on the linoleum, their presence silencing the room. The lead Marine, a woman with sharp eyes and a chest adorned with ribbons, scanned the diner before her gaze settled on Maria. "Sergeant Maria Torres?" she asked, her voice formal but warm. Maria nodded, her throat tight, her hands gripping the rag she held. The diner's eyes were on her now, the regulars who'd whispered about her scars, the ones who'd looked away when the businessmen mocked her. The Marine stepped forward, holding out the cloth-wrapped object, a medal gleaming as the fabric fell away. "For your service," she said, her voice carrying respect, recognition. The other Marines followed, each presenting a token of honor, their movements precise but their eyes soft with admiration. Maria stood tall, though her chest ached with a flood of emotions, pride, relief, the sharp sting of memories she'd buried. She thought of the desert, the searing heat, the chaos that had left her scarred but alive. She thought of the comrades she'd lost, the ones she'd saved, the weight of a life she'd left behind but carried in her bones. The businessman's words from yesterday echoed faintly, but they felt small now, insignificant against the honor unfolding before her. The diner remained silent, the customers' faces a mix of awe and shame. The elderly man at the counter wiped his eyes. The cook leaned against the wall, his spatula forgotten. Maria accepted each token, her hands steady, her scars no longer a mark of shame but a testament to her courage. Maria Torres navigated the crowded diner with a steady hand, pouring coffee into chip mugs as the morning rush swirled around her. The clatter of plates and the hum of small-town chatter filled the air, mingling with the rich aroma of frying bacon. Customers' eyes sometimes lingered on her, their gazes tracing the jagged scars that ran across her right cheek and down her neck. Maria felt the weight of their curiosity, the unspoken questions that hung between them. But she met each stare with unflinching resolve. Her dark eyes held a quiet strength, a refusal to shrink under scrutiny. Those scars were more than marks. They were proof of a life forged in fire, a story she carried with pride, even if she rarely spoke of it. By the service station, Eleanor, the diner's owner, sidled up to her. The older woman's face, etched with the lines of a life spent working hard and worrying harder, softened with concern. "You doing okay, honey?" she asked, her voice hushed to shield their words from the din. Maria paused, her fingers arranging forks and knives on a tray with mechanical precision. Eleanor's kindness stirred something in her, a flicker of warmth, but also a pang of vulnerability she quickly pushed down. "I'm fine," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I've dealt with worse than a few funny looks. Fallujah taught me how to handle people like that." "This?" She waved a hand toward the dining room, where a group of businessmen in crisp shirts whispered and glanced her way. "This is nothing." Eleanor studied her, her gray eyes searching for cracks in Maria's armor. For a moment, Maria felt laid bare, as if Eleanor could see the exhaustion she hid behind her steady hands. The older woman reached out, her calloused hand resting briefly on Maria's shoulder. "You don't have to wait on those jerks if they're making you uncomfortable. I'll take their table." Maria shook her head, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. "No way. I'm not letting their ignorance run me off. Some people are just afraid of what they can wrap their heads around." She grabbed the coffee pot, her grip tight, and marched back into the dining room. Her back was ramrod straight, her steps measured, each one a quiet declaration that she wouldn't be diminished. At a nearby table, an older man in a worn veteran's cap sat alone, his gnarled hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He'd noticed the businessmen's hushed snickers as Maria passed their booth, their nudges and smirks barely concealed. A slow burn of anger simmered in his gut. He knew that kind of judgment, the smug dismissal of people who'd never faced real hardship. He'd seen too many like Maria in his time, carrying burdens the world couldn't see. When she dropped off his check, he slid a $20 bill under the plate, a generous tip for his $5 breakfast. As he shuffled toward the door, he caught her eye and gave a deliberate nod, his weathered face conveying respect. Maria returned the gesture, her lips twitching in a faint, wordless acknowledgement. In that brief exchange, they recognized each other, two souls who understood the silent weight of sacrifice. Maria's scars weren't the result of some everyday mishap. They were the enduring marks of her service as a logistics specialist and field medic with the Marines Bravo 17 unit in Iraq. Her job had been relentless, ensuring supplies reached her unit through treacherous routes, keeping the wheels of their operations turning, and stitching up wounded comrades under fire until medevac could swoop in. It was a role that kept her just shy of the front lines. But in a war zone, safety was an empty promise. Danger was a constant, coiled in the air like a live wire. In 2010, during her second tour, her Ford operating base came under a vicious mortar assault. Maria had been in the supply yard ticking off crates of bandages and IV when the first shell hit. The ground lurched beneath her, the blast shockwave rattling her teeth. Screams and gunfire erupted, but fear didn't stop her. She saw a supply truck engulfed in flames, two young Marines trapped inside, their cries piercing the chaos. Her heart pounded, but instinct took over. She sprinted toward the fire, ignoring the heat searing her skin as she yanked the first Marine free, then dove back for the second. She just pulled him clear when a secondary explosion roared, the force hurling her against a concrete barrier. Pain tore through her right side, her vision swimming as his blood and dust coated her tongue. She remembered fragments, the stench of burning rubber, a voice shouting her name, the faint pulse of helicopter blades. Then, nothing. Maria never spoke of that day. Her Purple Heart, discharge papers, and a few grainy photos of her unit lay hidden in a locked metal box beneath her bed. The official reports use grand words like valor and extraordinary courage. But to Maria, they rang empty. She'd only done what needed doing, no more, no less. Civilian life, though, was a different kind of struggle. Job interviews began with promise but ended in quiet rejection. She'd sit across from hiring managers, watching their eyes drift to her scars, their smiles tightening as discomfort set in. The excuses were always the same. "We need someone with a different background," or "this role involves customer interaction, and we're worried about." They never said it outright, but Maria understood. Her face made people uneasy, and that was enough to shut her out. Each rejection chipped away at her confidence, leaving her wondering if she'd ever find a place to belong. Then came Eleanor's Diner, a gritty, unpretentious spot that valued grit over glamour. No fussy uniforms, just a demand for hard work and reliability. Eleanor, whose son had served in Afghanistan, didn't bat an eye at Maria's appearance during the interview. "Can you start tomorrow?" she'd asked, her tone matter-of-fact. Maria had nodded, a wave of relief washing over her. The diner became her anchor, a place where she could pour her energy into something tangible. She showed up early, stayed late, and treated every customer with the same quiet respect, no matter how they gawked. When young Marines from the nearby base stopped, Maria's focus sharpened. She'd glide over with fresh coffee, slip an extra slice of bacon onto their plates, and steer them to the sunlit tables by the windows. She never drew attention to her actions, but she saw everything. The unit patches stitched on their sleeves, the crisp lines of their haircuts, the mix of swagger and unease in their posture. Each detail tugged at her memories, pulling her back to the desert, to the brothers and sisters she'd left behind. A week before the businessmen's whispers, a group of young Marines had rolled in for breakfast. Their laughter filled the diner, but Maria caught the tension in their eyes, the kind that hinted at an impending deployment. She lingered at their table, topping off their mugs with a rare, warm smile. "You boys look out for each other, all right?" she said softly. One of them, a lanky kid barely out of his teens, met her gaze. His grin faded, replaced by a solemn nod. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Maria turned away, her throat tight, her mind drifting to where they might be a year from now, wondering if they'd come home whole or if they'd carry scars of their own. Maria moved through the diner with the ease of routine, her hands steady as she poured coffee for a group of men dressed in faded jeans and flannel shirts. Their civilian clothes couldn't hide the rigid posture, the sharp-eyed vigilance that screamed military training. She kept her eyes down, her dark hair tucked under a bandana, her heart flickering with an unease she couldn't place, a shadow of memories she didn't want to chase. When the men stood to leave, their boots scuffing softly against the worn linoleum, one lingered. Young, with a face too serious for his age, he slipped a folded napkin beneath his coffee cup, his movements careful, almost sacred. Maria didn't see it until she cleared the table, the napkin's crisp edges catching her attention. She unfolded it to find neat block letters. "Thank you for saving our captain. I recognize you from the picture he keeps. PFC Reynolds, B-17. The words hit her like a punch, stirring a storm of emotions. Pride, guilt, the weight of a past she'd buried. She didn't speak, didn't let her face betray the turmoil inside. Instead, she smoothed the napkin flat, slipped it into her apron pocket, and moved on with her shift. For days it stayed there, a quiet presence she touched when the diner grew still, its message burning in her mind. She couldn't bring herself to read it again, as if doing so might crack the fragile peace she'd built. Then came a morning that broke the rhythm of her life. Maria arrived at 5:15 a.m., her sneakers crunching on the gravel lot under a sky still heavy with stars. The air was sharp, tinged with the faint promise of rain and the earthy scent of coffee grounds from the dumpster. As she fumbled with the keys to unlock the diner's front door, a flicker of movement across the street stopped her cold. Her hand tightened around the keyring, her pulse quickening. In the dim glow of the streetlights, a crowd had gathered, men and women in a neat, orderly line stretching around the corner. Their silhouettes were unmistakable, their posture rigid with purpose. Marines, even in hoodies and worn caps, each clutching something small, wrapped in cloth, held close like a treasure. Her stomach churned with a mix of curiosity and dread. She flipped the diner's sign to open at 6 o'clock, the neon buzzing to life. The door opened, and a tall man stepped inside, his hair silver at the temples, his skin etched with the roughness of years under a desert sun. He sat at the counter, his presence commanding, yet quiet. "Coffee black," he said, his voice steady, then softer. "You don't remember me, do you, Torres?" Maria's hands paused on the coffee pot, her eyes searching his face, the lines around his eyes, the steady gaze. It stirred something deep, a memory taking shape. "Lieutenant Harlow," she said softly. "Captain now?" He gave a small smile tinged with weariness. "For now, retiring next month." She nodded, pouring his coffee with hands that had once stanched blood under fire, her movements as steady now as they'd been then. The memory came unbidden, smoke, heat, the roar of chaos. She pushed it away, focusing on the coffee. "Congratulations, sir," she said, her voice polite but distant, a barrier against the past. "I'm not here for congratulations," Maria, Harlow said, his eyes locked on hers. He set a small package on the counter, wrapped in faded green cloth, his hands careful, reverent. "I'm here to repay a debt. Do you remember the transport fire at Phoebe Courage?" The words were a jolt, her hand freezing, the coffee pot suspended. Her heart pounded, memories of fire and screams clawing to the surface. She didn't want to go back there, to the chaos she'd locked away. "I don't remember much," she said, her voice tight, "except that you couldn't get out, and I had 5 seconds to pull harder. Harlow's gaze softened, gratitude breaking through his calm. Those 5 seconds saved 12 people behind me, he said, his voice thick. They came home, Maria. They built lives on us, families, careers, because you carried a squad out of that fire. Outside, the line of Marines waited, their quiet presence a testament to something Maria couldn't yet name. Her throat tightened, emotions she'd buried rising like a tide. She set the coffee pot down, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of his words. She'd never let herself to think of the lives she'd saved, only the ones she couldn't. The morning unfolded, the door chiming as Marines entered one by one, each with a cloth-wrapped token, each with a piece of her story. Eleanor, the diner's owner, arrived to find the place alive with quiet strangers, a line still stretching outside. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. Maria shook her head, emotion choking her words as Harlow unwrapped his package. A battered Bravo 17 unit medallion gleamed faintly. "The first of many." "Or a many," he said. "Everyone who made it home wants to give you something. We've been searching for years. A private recognized you last week. His captain kept your picture from the field hospital where you bandaged others, your own wounds still bleeding." Tears stung Maria's eyes and she blinked them back, her jaw tight. "I was just doing my job," she whispered. "No, Torres," Harlow said, his voice fierce. "You went beyond. None of us have forgotten." The morning became a procession of gratitude, each Marine offering a token, a coin, a patch, a letter, pieces of lives Maria had shaped without knowing. She worked in a time, her heart a knot of pride and sorrow. She told herself her actions were ordinary, but now, faced with this quiet tribute, she felt the depth of her courage. A truck driver across the street, watching the line form, captured it on his phone. He posted the video online, his caption simple, "A hero works here." By noon it had spread, a ripple of recognition for a woman who'd never sought it, whose quiet strength had changed lives she'd never counted. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the first post hit the X platform, its caption raw and piercing. "A veteran disrespected, and this is how those she saved answered back." The words struck a chord, first rippling through local veteran groups, then surging across national networks like wildfire. By midday, the small diner where Maria worked, a modest establishment called Eleanor's, was surrounded by a line of people that stretched far beyond the cracked sidewalk out front. It didn't waver, didn't thin, even as the hours dragged on. Each Marine who stepped through the glass door ordered something simple, a burger, a coffee, a slice of pie, and left behind a token of gratitude, a unit coin, a weathered patch, a folded letter heavy with meaning. Maria, behind the counter, moved with the steady grace of someone who'd faced chaos before and come out the other side. Her hands trembled only slightly as she accepted each offering, her dark eyes reflecting a quiet strength that belied the storm of emotions within. Maria had never sought recognition. Years ago, she'd been Specialist Torres, a combat medic in the scorching sands of Fallujah, where the air smelled of smoke and fear. She'd carried lives in her hands, stitching together broken bodies under fire, her own heart pounding with the weight of each decision. Now, in this small-town diner, she poured coffee and served plates with the same focus, her past tucked away like a folded uniform in a drawer. But the post had changed everything. It wasn't just the tokens or the line that snaked around the block. It was the flood of comments pouring in online, each one a thread connecting her to lives she'd touched. One read, "Specialist Torres saved me during a medevac from Fallujah. She didn't just patch me up, she gave me courage when I thought I had none left. My kids have a dad because of her." Another, "My brother called her B7's angel. He wouldn't have made it home without her. Whoever found her, thank you." Maria read these in stolen moments between orders, her chest tightening with a mix of pride and disbelief. She'd done her job, nothing more, she told herself. But the words on the screen felt like echoes of voices she'd long tried to forget, voices that had cried out in pain or whispered thanks in the dark. By mid-afternoon, the local news vans had arrived, their cameras capturing the scene. A queue of veterans, some in faded caps emblazoned with unit insignias, others with canes or prosthetics, all waiting patiently under the blazing sun. Some stood for hours just for a moment with Maria, to shake her hand, to press a memento into her palm, to say the words they'd carried for years. Eleanor, the diner's owner, had to cancel the afternoon shift change, calling in extra staff to manage the crowd. The kitchen buzzed with frenetic energy, plates clattering, fryers hissing, but Maria never faltered. She worked through the rush, her movements deliberate, her smile soft but guarded. Only once did her composure crack. When a young man limped through the door, his prosthetic leg clicking softly against the linoleum. His face lit up when he saw her. "I remember you," Maria said, her voice catching as she leaned across the counter. "You told terrible jokes while I was tying your tourniquet. Kept saying you'd make me laugh." The man grinned, his eyes bright with memory. "Figured if I could get my medic to smile while my leg was half gone, I'd definitely survive." They laughed together, a brief shared moment that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Maria's heart swelled, but she pushed the feeling down, turning back to the next customer. Across town in a sterile hotel room, the man who'd mocked Maria the day before sat frozen, staring at the news coverage flickering on his television. He'd been a businessman passing through, quick with a dismissive comment about her service, unaware of the weight of her past. Now, the images of the line outside the diner, the stories of heroism, burned into him. Guilt gnawed at his gut, a sharp, unfamiliar ache. He picked up the phone, his fingers hesitant, and dialed the diner. When Eleanor answered, her tone was clipped, protective. She didn't want to bother Maria, not today. But he insisted, and when Maria finally took the receiver, her voice was steady, unshaken. "I want to apologize," he stammered, his words clumsy with regret. "I had no idea who you were." Maria cut him off, not harshly, but with a firmness that carried the weight of her years in the field. "It's fine. You couldn't have known. But I judged you too, and that wasn't fair either. We all make snap judgments. What matters is what we do with them after." She hung up before he could respond, returning to the counter where a new wave of customers waited. The apology lingered in her mind, but it felt like a drop in an ocean. She didn't need his remorse. She'd never needed validation from strangers. Her worth wasn't tied to their opinions. It was in the lives she'd saved, the hands she'd held, the quiet moments of survival she'd carried home. As the day wore on, the stories kept coming, each one a brushstroke painting Maria's past in vivid color. A retired colonel entered the diner late in the afternoon, his steps slow and deliberate, supported by a polished cane. He waited his turn, his eyes fixed on Maria with a reverence that made her uneasy. When he finally reached the counter, his voice was low, almost fragile. "You won't remember me," he began, his hands trembling slightly. "I was unconscious when you found me." Maria studied his weathered face, searching for a spark of recognition. "Northern Fallujah," he continued, his words measured. "The command post bombing. They told me you crawled through rubble with a broken arm to get to me, dragging blood plasma while the building was still coming down." Maria's breath caught, her mind flashing to that day. The dust, the screams, the weight of her own pain secondary to the lives in her hands. "I remember the building," she said softly. "There were 3 of you in the comm center." The colonel's eyes glistened. "Only I made it out. Because of you, I've got 3 grandchildren now. They wouldn't be here if you hadn't been." He pressed his colonel's eagle insignia into her hand, closing her fingers around it. "My daughter's a surgeon now. She chose medicine because of the stories I told her about you." Maria's throat tightened, but she only nodded, tucking the insignia into her apron pocket with the others. The diner became a nexus of these connections, a place where the invisible threads of Maria's actions wove together lives she'd never fully grasped. A mother handed her a letter from her son, who'd survived because of Maria's quick hands in a firefight. A former squad leader left a patch from their unit, his voice thick as he recounted how Maria's calm had steadied them all under fire. Each token, each story, was a piece of a legacy Maria had never claimed, a ripple effect of survival and gratitude that had been hidden until this moment. She felt it now, not as pride, but as a weight, a reminder of the lives she'd carried, the ones she'd saved, and the ones she couldn't. Her heart ached with the memory of those losses, but the gratitude in the diner grounded her, kept her moving forward. The next morning, Maria arrived at the diner before dawn, her breath visible in the cool air. She pushed open the door, expecting the usual quiet of the early shift. Instead, she found a steaming cup of coffee waiting at her station, prepared exactly as she liked it. Black, no sugar, just a hint of cinnamon. There was no note, no name, just the gesture itself, warm and unspoken. Maria paused, her fingers brushing the mug, and for the first time that week, she allowed herself a small, private smile. She didn't need to know who'd left it. It was enough that they had. Every morning as the sun crept over the horizon, Maria Torres found a single rose waiting on the counter of the diner where she worked. The delicate petals, always vibrant, seemed to carry a quiet message of gratitude, though the sender remained a mystery. Each bloom stirred a complex whirl of emotions in her, gratitude tinged with unease, pride shadowed by the weight of memories she'd tried to leave behind. She'd tucked the rose behind the counter, her fingers lingering on the soft petals, wondering who could know her story well enough to leave such a tribute. The anonymity of the gesture gnawed at her, a reminder of the past she'd worked so hard to distance herself from, yet it also warmed her heart, a silent acknowledgement that her sacrifices hadn't been forgotten. A week after a video of her quietly deflecting praise from a customer went viral, the local television station came calling. The producer's voice was eager, almost insistent, offering Maria a chance to share her story with the world. But Maria's heart clenched at the thought. Fame felt like a betrayal of the quiet resolve that had carried her through her service. "I didn't serve for recognition," she told Elena, her co-worker and closest confidant at the diner, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a flicker of vulnerability. "I don't need cameras to tell me what I did was real." Eleanor nodded, her own expression softening with understanding. Knowing Maria's scars, both visible and hidden, told a story louder than any broadcast could. When Captain Harlow reached out, however, Maria's resolve wavered. His voice, gravelly yet warm, carried the weight of shared history. He invited her to a ceremony organized by the former members of Bravo 17, the unit she'd once called family. They'd named it The Scars That Served, a title that sent a shiver down her spine, stirring memories of fire and chaos, of choices made in split seconds that had changed her life forever. Refusing her brothers and sisters in arms wasn't an option. Their bond was forged in moments too profound for words. The event was to honor her with a unit commendation, approved years ago but never delivered, lost in the shuffle of her abrupt departure from military life. The ceremony took place at the VFW Hall, just 3 blocks from the diner where Maria poured coffee and traded small talk with regulars. She arrived in a simple black dress, its modest elegance a stark contrast to the crisp uniform she'd once worn. Her dark hair fell loosely around her shoulders, a deliberate choice that felt both liberating and terrifying. For years, she'd pulled it back tightly, hiding the jagged scars that traced her neck and jaw, marks of an attack that had nearly claimed her life. Tonight, she let them show, a quiet act of defiance against the shame she'd carried for too long. As she stepped into the hall, the room fell silent, a hush so profound it felt like the air itself held its breath. 200 people, Marines in pristine dress blues, veterans in worn jackets, families of those she'd served beside, rose to their feet in unison. The gesture wasn't applause. It was something deeper, a collective salute that hit Maria like a wave. Her chest tightened, a knot of pride and grief twisting together as she fought to keep her composure. Captain Harlow, his face etched with the lines of a life spent leading, stepped forward to present the commendation. As he read the citation, detailing her actions during the attack, how she'd shielded her squad, dragging wounded comrades to safety even as shrapnel tore through her own body, Maria's defenses crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, tracing the familiar paths of her scars, each drop a release of the pain she'd buried for years. The room blurred around her, the faces of her unit blending with memories of that day. The heat, the screams, the instinct to act despite the fear that clawed at her insides. When Harlow finished, he looked at her with a mix of reverence and regret. "We searched for you for 7 years," he said, his voice catching. "After your medical discharge, you vanished. Some of us thought—" He trailed off, but Maria understood. Too many veterans didn't make it through the transition to civilian life. their invisible wounds proving deadlier than the physical ones. The thought hung heavy between them, a shared acknowledgement of the cost of survival. I needed to disappear for a while, Maria admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She met Harlow's gaze, seeing the young officer he'd been when they first met, now tempered by time and loss. I had to figure out who Maria Torres was without the uniform. The words felt raw, exposing a truth she'd barely admitted to herself. The military had given her purpose, but it had also left her adrift, grappling with an identity that no longer fit. A lieutenant, once a wide-eyed private she'd pulled from harm's way, overheard her and chimed in. I'm still figuring it out, she confessed, her hand brushing the scars along her neck. But they remind me I was there when it mattered. Her voice held a quiet strength, a conviction that had grown through years of wrestling with her past. A young Marine approached, his wife and infant son at his side. He introduced the baby as Tommy, his middle name Torres. Maria's breath caught, her heart swelling with a mix of surprise and humility. You didn't have to do that, she said, her voice trembling as she looked at the tiny face, unaware of the weight his name carried. The Marine's wife, her eyes bright with conviction, replied, We wanted to, so he grows up knowing his name carries a legacy of courage. Maria's throat tightened, the gesture piercing through the walls she'd built around her heart. She reached out, her scarred fingers gently brushing the baby's cheek, a silent promise to carry that legacy with honor. The event coordinator, a retired sergeant major with a voice that commanded attention, took the microphone. Scars are something no one asks for, he said, his words resonating through the hall, but sometimes they're proof of someone who didn't turn away when they could have. He unveiled a shadow box, its contents glinting under the lights. Maria's purple heart, recovered from military records after she'd left it behind. You walked away from this, he said, his tone gentle but firm. We thought it should come home to you. Maria stared at the medal, its purple ribbon a vivid reminder of the day she'd earned it. I never felt I deserved it, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Not when others gave so much more. The sergeant major's eyes softened. That's exactly why you do, he said, because you never thought you did. The room erupted, not in applause, but in the rhythmic tapping of unit coins on tables, a military tradition that sent a shiver down Maria's spine. Each tap was a tribute, a chorus of respect that echoed through her bones. The ceremony closed with the presentation of a leather-bound book, its pages filled with letters from those Maria had touched, comrades she'd saved, families she'd given closure, even strangers inspired by her story. She opened it later, alone, her fingers trembling as she read the words of gratitude and admiration. The final page held a simple message. You are enough. Those 3 words, written in an unfamiliar hand, broke something open inside her, a release of the doubt and guilt she'd carried for so long. Maria left the hall that night with the book clutched to her chest, the purple heart in its shadow box under her arm. The roses would continue to appear at the diner, their mystery unsolved, but she no longer needed to know who left them. The scars she bore, once a source of shame, now felt like a badge of survival, a testament to a life that had mattered, and still did. Just as Maria Torres moved through the familiar rhythm of Eleanor's diner with a quiet grace, her hands steady as she poured steaming coffee into chipped ceramic mugs. The early morning light filtered through the blue checkered curtains, casting soft patterns across the linoleum floor. Her scars, jagged and prominent across her cheek and neck, told a story she rarely spoke aloud, though they whispered it to anyone who looked closely enough. Each mark was a testament to a moment of courage, a decision made in the heat of chaos that had changed lives. Hers included. She felt the weight of those scars every day, not as a burden but as a quiet reminder of who she was and what she'd done. They were her history, etched into her skin, and she wore them with a private pride, though she'd never admit it. The day before, the entire Bravo 17 unit had sent her a message, their words heavy with gratitude and reverence. Your scars tell a story of selflessness, they'd written, their collective voice carrying the weight of shared memories from a battlefield far from the diner's comforting hum. Our lives tell the story of your impact. Maria had read the note in the dim light of her small apartment above the diner, her fingers tracing the words as her heart clenched with the mix of gratitude and unease. She didn't see herself as they did, a hero, a savior. She was just Maria, a woman who'd done what needed doing when the world was falling apart around her. The praise sat heavy in her chest, like a stone she wasn't sure she deserved to carry. The next morning, a package arrived at the diner, addressed to her in careful, blocky handwriting. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a custom-made name tag, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It read, Maria Torres, Bravo 17, with the Marine Corps emblem embossed beside it, a proud eagle, globe, and anchor. A note was tucked alongside it, the words simple but piercing. To wear if you choose, so no one mistakes your scars for weakness again. Maria's breath caught as she held the tag, her fingers trembling slightly. For a moment, she was back in the dust and smoke of 2010, the air thick with the acrid sting of burning metal, her hands bandaged but still moving, still pulling others to safety. She shook her head to clear the memory and pinned the name tag to her apron, the small act feeling like a quiet declaration. She wasn't hiding anymore. Not from her past, not from the world's gaze. That afternoon, the diner's bell jingled, and three men in crisp suits stepped inside. Maria recognized them immediately. The businessmen who'd been there days before, their eyes lingering too long on her scars, their whispers sharp with uninformed judgment. Now they looked different, their faces softened by something like shame. The leader, a man with graying temples and a hesitant step, approached her as she stood behind the counter, her hands busy wiping down the worn surface. I came to say I'm sorry, he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the diner's ambient clatter. I judged you harshly without knowing your story. His eyes darted to the floor, then back to her, searching for forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. Maria watched him, her gaze steady but not unkind. She saw the struggle in his posture, the way his hands fidgeted, betraying a man unaccustomed to admitting fault. Sometimes the most important stories aren't visible on the surface, he added, his voice softer now, as if he'd learned this lesson through pain of his own. I've learned that the hard way. His eyes landed on the name tag pinned to her apron, the Marine Corps emblem catching the light. You're a hero, he said, the words earnest but heavy, like he was trying to make up for his earlier misstep. Maria shook her head, a small, wistful smile tugging at her lips. No, she said, her voice firm but gentle. I'm a survivor who did what was necessary, just like anyone else would. The man frowned, unconvinced. Not anyone, he countered, his tone insistent. You ran toward danger when others ran away. That's not nothing. Maria didn't argue further, just reached for the coffee pot and refilled his cup, the familiar motion grounding her. That's not heroism, she said quietly. It's just duty. The word felt right to her, solid and true, a cornerstone of the life she'd built from the ashes of war. As the men finished their meal and prepared to leave, each one quietly slipped a $100 bill under his plate, a silent gesture of respect. Maria collected the bills without a word, her face unreadable. She walked to the donation jar by the register, marked Veteran Support Services, and let the bills slide through the slot. The jar, which had sat nearly empty for months, was now brimming with contributions, each one a small testament to the community's growing awareness of Maria's story. She didn't need the money, not for herself. She had her diner, her routine, her small apartment with its creaky floorboards and familiar quiet. But there were others out there, veterans still navigating the long road home, and she knew what it was to feel lost in the aftermath. Eleanor, the diner's owner, watched from the kitchen doorway, her hands dusted with flour, her apron streaked with grease. She was a woman of few words, but her eyes held a warmth that spoke volumes. You could have kept that money, she said, her voice gruff but laced with affection. God knows you've already earned it. Maria turned to her, and for a moment, her guarded expression softened into a smile that lit up her scarred face, transforming it into something radiant, almost otherworldly. I have everything I need, she said simply, her voice steady with conviction. But there are others still finding their way home. Eleanor nodded, her own heart swelling with pride for the woman she'd come to see as more than just an employee, a sister, a survivor, a quiet force of good in a world that often overlooks such things. Eleanor's diner hadn't changed much over the years. The same blue checkered curtains framed the windows, their edges frayed but familiar. The special board still proclaimed meatloaf on Thursdays and pot pie yamar on Sundays, handwritten in Eleanor's careful script. Maria still poured the first cup of coffee at 6 a.m. sharp, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. But something had shifted in the diner's soul. Customers now greeted Maria with a new name, one spoken with reverence. The Bravo Marine. It wasn't a title she'd chosen, but she didn't correct them. It felt like a gift, a way for the community to claim her as their own. On the diner's wall, a new frame hung proudly, its contents drawing the eye of every patron. It was a photograph from 2010, captured by a combat photographer in the midst of chaos. Maria was there, her hands wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, her uniform stained and torn, carrying a young Marine away from a burning vehicle. Smoke and grime obscured part of her face, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination, a resolve that no amount of dirt or pain could dim. Beneath the photo, a small brass plaque bore words Maria had reluctantly agreed could be shared. I never sought recognition. I only hoped those I pulled out would live long enough to live kindly toward others. The words were her truth, distilled into a single sentence, a quiet prayer for a world that could be better than the one she'd seen at its worst. The diner had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, an unofficial memorial for those who understood the cost of service. Veterans from neighboring states made the journey just to sit at the counter, to shake Maria's hand, or to share their own stories of survival and loss. Some left behind unit coins, small tokens of their own battles, which Eleanor carefully arranged on a shelf, each one a piece of a larger mosaic. Others simply nodded to Maria, a silent acknowledgement of shared scars, visible or not. Every Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock a.m., a group of young Marines in training claimed the corner booth, their faces bright with the nervous energy of those yet to see combat. Maria served them herself, her presence steady and calming. During her break, she'd sit with them, answering their questions with a quiet honesty that made the unknown seem less daunting. She offered advice, not as a hero, but as someone who'd walked the path they were preparing to tread, her scars a map of survival they could trust. Maria's heart was full in those moments, though she'd never say it aloud. She felt the weight of their trust, the way their eyes lingered on her name tag, the way their voices softened when they spoke her name. She didn't need their gratitude, but she accepted it, letting it settle into the quiet corners of her soul. The diner, with its clinking plates and murmured conversations, was her home, her sanctuary. And in its warmth, she found a purpose that no medal or title could ever match, helping others find their way, just as she had, one cup of coffee, one story, one small act of kindness at a time. The cold morning air bit at Maria's fingertips as she unlocked the diner's front door, her breath visible in the pre-dawn chill. She paused, her hand lingering on the knob, her mind drifting to the scars etched across her body, reminders of a life shaped by service, sacrifice, and survival. They weren't just marks, they were stories, each one a testament to moments when she'd pushed through fear, pain, and dawati. To her, they were no cause for shame. It's not the scars that define you, she'd told a group of wide-eyed recruits at the local Marine base last month, her voice steady but warm. It's who you choose to be in spite of them. The words had lingered in her mind ever since, heavy with the weight of her own journey. Inside the diner, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and warm grease welcomed her. As she tied her apron, a young woman's question from that same recruit visit replayed in her head. Barely 20, the enlistee had leaned forward, her voice trembling. How do you deal with the fear? Maria had seen the girl's uncertainty, the flicker of doubt in her eyes, and felt a pang of recognition. She'd been that young once, standing on the edge of an unknown future, her heart racing with equal parts dread and determination. I never tried to be fearless, Maria had answered, her words catching the recruits off guard. Fearless people don't see the risks. They're reckless, blind to what's at stake. Brave people feel every ounce of fear, know every danger, and choose to act anyway. That's the difference. She'd watched the young woman's face shift, a spark of understanding breaking through her nervousness. Maria hoped the words would stay with her, a quiet anchor for the challenges ahead. The viral moment that had thrust Maria's story into the spotlight, a grainy video of her speaking those same words at a community event, had long since faded from social media feeds and news headlines. But its ripples still touched the town. 3 local businesses, inspired by her resilience, had rewritten their hiring policies to prioritize veterans with visible injuries, offering them not just jobs, but a chance to rebuild their sense of purpose. A scholarship fund in Maria's name now supported veterans pursuing medical training, a cause she held close to her heart. The town council, in a unanimous vote, had even renamed the street outside the diner Maria's Way, unveiling the new sign during a modest Veterans Day ceremony. Maria had attended reluctantly, standing at the back of the small crowd, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. The mayor's speech about community and service had felt too grand, too polished for her liking. When he'd called her forward to speak, her stomach had churned. She'd kept it brief, her voice soft but firm. Thank you to everyone who's ever worn a uniform. Our scars, whether you can see them or not, bind us. They're proof we've lived, fought, and carried on. She'd stepped back quickly, eager to escape the attention, her cheeks warm despite the November chill. On slow afternoons, when the diner's lunch rush dwindled to a trickle, Maria transformed the back room into a makeshift classroom. Young Marines from the nearby base would gather, their notebooks open, their eyes fixed on her as she taught them first aid. Her hands, once steady under the chaos of gunfire, moved with the same calm precision as she demonstrated how to tie a tourniquet, stabilize a fracture with scavenged materials, or soothe someone racked with pain. Knowledge weighs nothing, she'd tell them, her voice carrying a quiet urgency. Carry as much as you can. You never know when it'll save a life, yours or someone else's. She watched their faces, saw the mix of awe and determination, and felt a swell of pride. These were her people, bound by the same unspoken code that had carried her through her darkest days. Captain Harlow, now retired, was a fixture at the diner, his monthly visits as predictable as the sunrise. He always claimed the same stool at the counter, always ordered black coffee, and always left a Marine unit coin beside her saucer, a silent nod to their shared history. During his last visit, he'd slid an envelope across the counter, the Marine Corps seal glinting under the diner's fluorescent lights. They want to feature your story in the training manuals, he'd said, his gruff voice softened by a rare smile, to show recruits what our core values really mean: honor, courage, commitment. Maria had stared at the envelope, her fingers hesitating before touching it. A familiar unease stirred in her chest, the same reluctance she'd felt at the street naming ceremony. My story's not special, she'd murmured, her eyes fixed on the counter. There are thousands like me, men and women who've done the same, or more. Harlow's gaze had held hers, steady and unyielding. That's exactly why it matters, Maria. You're not just one story, you're all of them. You carry the weight of every Marine who served quietly, who wears their battles on their skin, who keeps serving even after the uniform's gone. His words had struck her deeply, lodging in her heart like a stone she couldn't dislodge. That night, alone in her small apartment, Maria had opened the envelope. The letter, written on crisp Marine Corps stationery, requested permission to include her story in leadership training, praising her actions as exemplifying the highest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. She'd read it twice, her eyes lingering on the formal language, her mind wrestling with the idea of her life being distilled into a lesson. After a long pause, she'd signed the consent form, her pen scratching across the paper. At the bottom, she'd added a note in her neat handwriting. Tell them the scars are just geography, maps of where we've been, not chains holding us back. She'd sealed the envelope with a quiet resolve, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The next morning, Maria arrived at the diner to find an unexpected gift beside her usual coffee cup, a hand-carved wooden box, its lid etched with a simple Marine emblem. Inside were dozens of notes, scrawled in the uneven handwriting of schoolchildren. Their teacher, a Marine veteran who'd served 2 tours overseas, had shared Maria's story during a lesson on courage. One note, written in bright blue crayon, stopped her breath. Thank you for being brave when it was hard. My dad has scars too. Now he doesn't feel alone. Maria's throat tightened as she read it, her fingers brushing over the paper. She slipped the note into her apron pocket, where it stayed through her entire shift, a quiet reminder that her story had reached further than she'd ever imagined. Every time she felt its edges against her hip, she thought of the child's father, a man she'd never met, and hoped her words had brought him a moment of peace. Eleanor, the diner's owner, had recently hung a small sign near the register, its words simple but profound. In this diner, we respect all scars, seen and unseen. It had become a quiet anthem for the place, a promise that everyone who walked through the door, veteran or not, would find understanding. Maria saw it every day, and though she'd never admit it, the sign warmed her in a way she hadn't expected. It was a reminder that her scars, her story, her service had carved out a space where others could heal too. In the small, tight-knit town, the diner's heartfelt motto began to ripple outward, touching every corner of the community like a warm, steady breeze. What started as a simple phrase, born from the soul of the diner's owner, Maria, found its way onto the signs and walls of other local businesses. The hardware store down the street etched it into their window display, a quiet nod to the resilience that bound the town together. The bakery, where early risers gathered for coffee and gossip, painted it above their counter, the words glowing under the soft light of dawn. Even the town's high school principal, a woman who carried the weight of guiding young minds, felt its power. She had it printed on a sleek, polished plaque and hung it proudly in the counseling office, where students wrestling with their own doubts could see it and feel a spark of hope. At the local VA clinic, the motto was pinned to the bulletin board in the waiting room, its words offering solace to veterans who sat in silence, haunted by memories they rarely shared. Each place that adopted the motto seemed to breathe a little deeper, as if the town itself was knitting its wounds together through shared conviction. Every year, on the anniversary of the day the Marine stood in a solemn line outside her diner, a moment etched into Maria's heart like a sacred vow, she allowed herself a rare day of rest. The diner, usually alive with the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation, fell quiet without her steady presence. Maria's absence was felt by everyone, from the regulars who relied on her warm smile to the staff who saw her as their anchor. On this day, she drove an hour to the Veterans Cemetery, a place both heavy with loss and radiant with honor. The road stretched out before her, lined with fields that shimmered under the morning sun, and as she drove, her thoughts wandered. She remembered the faces of those she served alongside, the laughter they shared in fleeting moments of peace, and the unbearable silence that followed their loss. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles paling, as she fought the ache that never fully left her chest. Yet there was purpose in her pain, a fire that kept her moving forward. At the cemetery, Maria walked slowly among the headstones, each one a story, a life, a sacrifice. The grass was soft beneath her boots, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and flowers. She felt the weight of every name carved into the stone, names she knew as well as her own. Her heart swelled with pride for their courage, but it also cracked with the grief of their absence. In her hands, she carried a small bundle of flowers, each one chosen with care from the florist in town who always set aside the freshest blooms for her. For every grave marked with the insignia of Bravo 17, her old unit, she knelt and placed a single flower at its base. Her fingers brushed the cold stone, and she whispered, "I remember you." The words were soft, almost swallowed by the breeze, but they carried the depth of her soul. To each fallen comrade, she made a silent promise. "I live every day for those who cannot." It was a vow she renewed every year, not out of obligation, but out of love, a love that burned fiercely despite the years that tried to dull it. Maria's scars, once a source of shame, had become her strength. Back at the diner, when customers' eyes lingered on the jagged lines that traced her arms and neck, she no longer turned away or hid beneath long sleeves. In the past, she'd felt their stares like a judgment, a reminder of the wars she carried inside her. She'd wondered if they saw her as broken, a relic of something they could never understand. But now, when their gazes met hers, Maria stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes clear and unyielding. There was no shame in her expression, only the quiet power of someone who had walked through fire and emerged whole. Her scars told a story of survival, of nights spent under a sky torn by explosions, of moments when she thought she wouldn't make it, and of the stubborn will that brought her home. She met their looks with a steady gaze, as if to say, "This is who I am, This is what I've carried. Some customers, caught off guard by her confidence, offered a shy smile or a nod, while others looked away, humbled by the strength in her eyes. Maria's story didn't need words to resonate. It lived in the way she moved through the diner, her hands quick but gentle as she poured coffee or slid plates across the counter. It shone in the way she listened to her customers, really listened, as if their joys and sorrows mattered as much as her own. Her heroism wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't wear a uniform or demand attention. It was in the quiet choices she made every day, to keep going, to honor her fallen friends, to build a life that mattered. Her scars, once a mark of pain, had transformed into badges of honor. They weren't just a reminder of what she'd lost, but of what she'd gained, a clarity of purpose, a community that embraced her, and a courage that grew stronger with every step she took. In the town, Maria's presence was a living testament to resilience. Some heroes, the townsfolk realized, didn't need capes or medals. Some carried their battles in their skin, their hearts, their unwavering resolve. And some scars, they learned, weren't meant to be hidden. They were meant to be seen, to tell a story of survival that inspired everyone who witnessed it.